Hello and welcome back to the Transfer Flow podcast. And on today's episode, we're rounding up the January transfer window. Man City finally spent big on a midfielder, but why is Nico Gonzalez an unusual Rodri replacement? Spanish teams stayed out of the market, but what's stopping Real Madrid and the others from investing? While Italian teams like Milan and Como splashed the cash, what to make of their mid-season splurges? That's all on today's episode. So we're back for another midweek edition of the Transfer Flow podcast, and we're still mopping up the January window. And today, to help me, I'm joined by José Pérez. How are you doing?
Hello, Patrick. Hello, everyone. Happy to be here.
Yeah, so José comes to us from managing Madrid and Football España. So it's kind of good today because it's been a very unusual window by Spanish football standards, especially Real Madrid. We're going to come on to it later, went into the window with a lot of needs. It feels like some of the teams, Manchester City, went out and spent huge to deal with their issues, and other teams entirely sat out the window for a bunch of interesting reasons. It's kind of a strange split.
Yes, and I'm sure that for the teams that didn't spend any money, their fans will be very happy with current business.
Oh, yeah. Like, I think Arsenal fans are taking it super well.
Yeah, everyone. Real Madrid fans have been suffering this for a while. Like we're going to discuss it a bit later, but Liverpool and Real Madrid have some similarities in how they deal with transfers.
They do, and yeah, that's an interesting one. So we could compare them maybe to the team we're going to talk about first, because Manchester City went into January with a ton of needs, and I think in the end, 4 of the 8 biggest transfers that happened in January were Man City transfers. And the last one that appeared in the news really suddenly and got done very, very quickly was Nico Gonzalez. And that was interesting because that was kind of the move. A midfield transfer was the one that we all expected them to do. And it looked at the 11th hour like they weren't going to make it, but instead they've got him in from Porto. Do you find it strange that they've left themselves in this position over the last few years? Because Man City, I guess because they win trophies, always get credit for their squad building. But the last couple of years, it does feel like they've maybe neglected some needs.
Yes, and that's one of the things about City squad building that I've found weird. Like the last couple years, it's been a bit. It's almost like Pep had forgotten. It's like, oh, we need fullbacks. We need like normal fullbacks. We need central midfielders, and then he's moved into this model, right, where the fullbacks are essentially center backs that maybe have very good ball playing. They can kind of adapt, but it's kind of a more he's become more conservative with the fullback, so using more center back profiles for that. And then the more puzzling one has been midfield, especially as really like top class midfielders age out. It is surprising how City had kind of not it is, of course, maybe even if they could spend 100 million, it would be hard to replace Kevin De Bruyne or Gundogan. It's like they were players who were at the top of their game, and really it's hard to replace them. But that your replacements are, say, Mateus Nunes, it still comes up a bit short. So yeah, and then Kovacic, it like maybe on paper had some characteristics that could help here, but he's also not young, so he's not like the kind of we get like a midfielder between 25 who's going to be like the next midfield general at City. It wasn't really a signing done with that kind of mindset, so it really felt like City hasn't done like properly a renewal in central midfield areas.
Yeah, I know. I agree. Kovacic is one of those weird guys because he doesn't have the box presence to cover the Gundogan role, and parking him in one position and asking him to screen the defense in a. I know that Rodri is more mobile than that, but like he basically fills that hole in the center of the park. Like Kovacic, what's always been great about him is his ball carrying, and so the idea of taking that away from him in order to use him as a 6 seems weird to me too. Plus the thing that stands out to me in all this, I've rabbited on about it before in the past, but the way that the press has gradually decreased, to me, puts even more emphasis on having good stoppers in midfield and in defense. So I looked at some numbers for this, and the Premier League generally has become a harder pressing league. 4 years ago, median tackles in the final third, it was like 1.9 per 90. Now, 2 years ago, 2.3. Now it's 2.6, which as a proportion is pretty big, I think. And as the league has become more aggressive and athletic, obviously teams are better at playing out of pressure. But City have become less and less aggressive in the press. So I looked at their passes per defensive action for the last 4 seasons. 4 years ago, 8.5. They were second in the league. 3 years ago, 10.3, seventh in the league. Last year, 11.3, ninth in the league. This season, 12.5, 14th in the league. So they've steadily become less aggressive in trying to disrupt possession. This season, the only teams in the league who've allowed their opponents a higher pass completion than them are Ipswich, Villa, Everton, Southampton, and Leicester. Now, does that seem like a good group to be in?
Yep. Yeah, and I think what's interesting is that usually you press high and it means that you will concede fewer chances, but each one of those chances you concede will be higher quality. But
Yeah,
right
sure.
now, City is conceding high quality chances while also conceding more because they're defending further back. I think also the decrease in passes per defensive action, I think it's also pretty typical of an aging squad where
Sure. Yeah.
like De Bruyne and Gundogan cannot run the way they did 4 or 5 years ago. So the intensity understandably drops. And also, Rodri is a player who can win defensive duels, but he's not this player who can cover like insane amounts of ground out of nowhere. So it feels like in that midfield there was no one who could really compensate. Like, sure, maybe you can play with Rodri and one of the older midfielders, but maybe you needed someone who could cover a lot more ground to compensate there, or you had forwards who had really good pressing work rates. But yes, I think this is very consistent with City's squad aging.
No, I completely agree. And yeah, that's the thing. Like Rodri, you're right. He's not an N'Golo Conte type. It's more about anticipation with him. But gradually, it's been very clear this season that nobody in the midfield can really run. And so I guess the question is, what do we think about Nico Gonzalez as a new person in that midfield? Because obviously came through the ranks at Barcelona. Back then he was more of a pivot type player. But at Porto has become more of a box crasher, like plenty of goal involvements this season, tons of touches in the box relative to his peers. What do you make of him as a candidate?
Yes, so the Nico story is quite interesting because Barcelona is in this period where they have so many new interesting young players, and they still had one that kind of escaped and gets sold for 60 million to City. Like, that's the
Sure.
production. That's really the level of their academy production. I think when he left Barcelona, I had this impression of, I feel like this is a bit of a wasted opportunity because I didn't know if Nico could really become long term a starter at Barcelona, but it was a team where Busquets was about to retire, to leave, retire. Uh, and I thought it was a good, and he was fulfilling more kind of positional duties. So I thought this is a good time to keep him there. I don't know if he'll start, but he's a good profile to have in the squad at least.
Mm,
But Barcelona were not interested. They still suffer now from the absence of a pure six. But anyways, that might have been an interesting evolution for Nico, because even when you saw him at Barcelona, he was doing more defensive duties, but from time to time he would do this bit of box crashing that you thought, oh, this is pretty good. But of
mm.
course, I didn't imagine that he could do this more consistently. And it looks like Porto has really taken advantage of it. So the interesting thing is that right now City maybe needs the older Nico right
Yeah.
now, like the more positional one, rather than this new one who is a more dynamic player who does more box crashing. Um, I am very curious as to how Pep will use him. Will he use him more as a positional six, or will he use him more as what he's doing now, more as an eight? And if he does that, like I'm imagining that there will be some kind of double pivot with Kovacic, where each one of them kind of take turns at organizing passing. Sometimes one stays back, the other one goes forward. That's the role I could imagine for him right now.
Yeah, I think that. asking him to come in and immediately take the sixth role in a team which is dysfunctional in many aspects. They've lost so many of their lines of defense, from the press to Kyle Walker. That's kind of their first and their last line of defense, both out the window. I would hate to be asked to come in and play a sole kind of holding midfielder role in that situation. But yeah, you're right. This it's strange, isn't it, to think, well, he's caught our eye at Porto, but we're going to sign him on the basis of what he was. Like, we could digitally DH him like Benjamin Button, and we'll get the kind of Barcelona version of him. But he's very dribbly. He's pretty press resistant, and he's a big guy as well. He's like
Yes.
nearly 6'3". Like he physically, there is a Rodri-ness to him, I guess. And I do think that the lack of the athletic drop off for City has been a real problem, right? Like pace, they've got a load of big guys, but the combination of pace and size only exists in maybe one or two of them.
Yes, and that's a situation that I feel like we hadn't seen in ages, where it feels like City are being physically
Yeah.
overpassed by their opponents. Like, this is something like this is, for example, peak City, say 2021, 2022. 2022, they were monsters physically. It was a
Mm,
team that it was very difficult to outmuscle, and they could still be a threat, and they were still fast enough to be a threat, like in transition, going back and forth in the pitch. Now it really feels like that it's, say, a Bournemouth or a team like that can really outspeed them.
mm.
So it's interesting to see what it will take, because this is like City's whole problem right now it's a matter of of course, player profiles and regaining some of that physicality, especially in midfield areas. But I'm also curious to see how the tactics will adapt, because ultimately Pep wanted to play a more slower, more controlled game, but it
Hmm.
looks that right now the game in the Premier League is going too quickly.
Yes.
So at this point, Pep is in this juncture where he has to figure out, how does he adapt? Does he want to play at the same speed of the other teams, or does he find a new way, or he tries to adapt and try to keep games as control as he'd like them to?
Yeah, it almost feels like that maybe is an idea he's going to have to drop. I mean, it would be hard for him to, because I guess it's the organizing principle of his managerial career. Like, control. How do we avoid getting countered? Especially, you think, after some of those huge losses in the Champions League. Before he went to Manchester City, it felt like he was insistent, like, this can never happen again. And then they've happened relentlessly, traumatically so, over the last couple of months. So yeah, I think that a load of this is just going to have to be solved on the training field. Like, it doesn't really feel like a solely personnel problem to fix. I want to move on, because we want to talk a little bit about Spain, and we want to talk about City's Champions League opponents as well. We want to come on to them in a little bit. But before we do, I just wanted to get your take on the broader picture of the Premier League during this transfer window, because Ted and I on Monday were not hugely complimentary to Aston Villa's aggressive business in January. And I thought it would be funny to let you take some of the heat, if you agree with us on
Yeah.
that.
Yes, I do. So I guess this is another opportunity for Villa fans to talk to me. To be so let's see. To be fair, and I think in our newsletter, this was mentioned, that the good thing about this is that they're loans, and if it doesn't work out, like, you're gonna spend like a bunch of millions right now paying salaries in this second half of the season, but if it doesn't work out, well, we did what we thought was necessary in order to try to break into Champions League. Didn't work, let it go. But I am not super enthusiastic about the transfers. Partly, maybe it's because I had also like a certain idea of what I thought Villa needed for their attack, and none of the guys here are kind of what I had in mind. Because at least I look at
Mm,
Villa's squad and I felt like, oh, these guys need, say, like a dribbly boy, like somebody who can really unbalance defenses via
yeah.
dribble. And none of these guys are really like, I feel like Villa has a lot of these versatile attackers who can do who can do several things well, but are not like top class at anything in particular. So
Yes.
so I felt like they needed maybe say a more specialized dribbler or a more specialized striker, but they still got a lot of guys who to me are good at several things, but so I'm a bit curious as to how they're going to make this work out. I also felt that they needed maybe more of an on-ball creator, which they are getting in a way with Asensio. It's just
Yeah.
he's not at the part of the age curve where I would have decided to sign him. And,
Hmm.
and 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 he's also not kind of the dribbler that I had in mind that maybe Villa needed best. But anyways, the whole thing is that I'm just not convinced by the profiles of the attackers that they sign. Disasi is he's a very Emery Aston Villa center back signing. Like, uh, it's because they never sign. Honestly, they rarely sign a defender that I actually think is a good defender. Like Pau Torres is a guy that uh, he's great. He's great with the ball, but as an actual defender, I find him a bit soft, and especially if you put him in the Premier League. So it feels very on brand for Villa signing. So I don't think. Of course, like Disasi can still be a useful piece in this team. It's just I kind of again I expected maybe something a different profile, and it wasn't that. So more than saying that it was good or that their window was good or bad, I had kind of my own idea of what I thought they needed to reinforce and strengthen the squad, and this is a bit different from what I thought they needed.
I completely agree. Like, I mean, even just Marlon and Rashford like feel like very similar kind of profiles. Like, these are shot getting. They're not really wingers. They're guys who get shots from wide positions, and they don't really do much else. But it
And
felt
Malen
like
too, and Malen too.
yeah, yeah, but it felt like their analysis was similar to yours originally, because in the summer they went and got Philogene, who only popped for dribbles, and then this window they were like, oh, then they didn't play him, and this window they were like, oh, we hate this, like let's move this guy on. So they felt in the summer we need somebody who's a one-on-one threat. 6 months later, they say, you know what? We need fewer one-on-one threats. We need we need a bunch of guys who just want to shoot all the time. I mean, look, I do agree about Asensio in the sense that like if it feels a little bit like Tielemans and to some extent Lucadine that have been the guys who do all the creative passing, and there's nobody else who does much. Like Morgan Rogers, you can call him an attacking midfielder, but he's not a penetrating passer. So yeah, it's look, if it works out for them, flags fly forever. But do I see them getting into the top 5 of the Premier League, or do I see them winning the Champions League? Don't really know. Don't doubt it.
Yeah, and that doesn't. For example, Asensio has had the characteristic that no matter, like even like when he had few minutes at PSG or Real Madrid, he still put up very good production. And again, he's a good creator. He's reminds me a bit of Gakpo in the sense that his best characteristic is his ball striking. So a lot of what he does, it's just really good ball striking. He can get shots from he can finish well shots from other positions that other players would struggle with because his ball striking is that good, and he can put really quality passes, crosses, etc. That's usually how he creates, not so much from the dribble, but he's usually extremely effective about it. The other thing is that defensively, at least Real Madrid is not the best environment to teach defenders, but he wasn't particularly defensive there. Maybe a different code. Maybe Emery can get that out of him, but we'll see.
Yeah, he and Rashford and Marlon are not guys I think of as like defensive demons, But to look at some other Premier League clubs, were you surprised that Arsenal and Liverpool didn't do any business? Because Liverpool, it feels like they're going to win the Premier League fairly comfortably, but obviously as well they topped the Champions League table, and they're as good as anybody else in the Champions League this season. Certainly, it felt like with a transfer or two in the past, maybe we'd have seen them make a transfer or two to try and lock those things up. For Arsenal, I don't think a transfer or two is going to make the difference in the league, but in the Champions League, maybe. So was it surprising that these teams who we know have more money than most teams in Europe, who we know have big trophies on the table, decided to stick to a longer term plan?
So I don't find it that surprising precisely because of what you say. Like maybe they're more focused on the longer term picture, especially with Liverpool, because like Liverpool are just in a pretty good position. And I also think that both for Arsenal and Liverpool, I have a feeling that the targets that they really want are targets that they would not be able to get in the winter. That's
Definitely.
kind of my impression. So if Arsenal wants really like a top class forward, unless you have PSG or City money, it's gonna be kind of difficult to get a player right now like that right now. And Liverpool, if they want, say, I don't know, like the next, think about their next big young center back. Like say you go for Dean Housen or someone like that.
Hmm.
That's also another kind of player that you have to wait until the summer to get. So that's my overall impression of both Arsenal and Liverpool, that their targets are targets that were kind of hard to get in the winter, which is why I mean Arsenal still, I think, according to the rumors, still try to do a bit there, but
Mm.
I find it I find it hard. Like Arsenal is in a really tricky spot when it comes to the forward line, because I do feel that they need a like a kind of player and a kind of top quality forward that costs a lot, and they are in that situation of like, when should we spend the money, who should we spend it on, and
Mm.
it looks like they want to err on the side of caution. But it also means that whatever hope they had for a title race would be, yeah, like in a way it's almost like saying, this is, yeah, we're just gonna do what we can right now, but yeah, it feels like something that's more thinking long term than thinking about winning. Say the like trying to make a push, a harder push for the league this season.
Yeah, I mean, I think that maybe if the points had been closer, maybe they'd have tried to push the boat out a little bit more. But you're 6 points behind. Liverpool have a game in hand, and the Champions League is always going to be a bunch of coin flips. It just feels like it makes sense, especially because, as you're saying, Arsenal probably need a really elite forward. Getting a guy to soak up some minutes is very helpful, but is it a difference maker over the rest of the season? Probably not. And I kind of also feel with Arsenal's season, sometimes you think, okay, this is the year we take our medicine. Like we get a bunch of red cards, we get a bunch of injuries, we play too conservatively for some stretches. It just isn't gonna work out for us. Okay, like next year's the year. But it does fit in, these two clubs sitting out the market, with a larger trend of reduced spending during the winter. Man City went and spent a lot, and ordinarily we might expect that to kind of grease the wheels around Europe. But certainly in Spain, almost nothing happened in the transfer window, right? It was single figures, like numbers of players who moved for real money.
It's so for the listener, if you want to do an interesting experiment, go to Transfermarkt and look at the list of like league spending on the transfer window, like as it's classified by league. And you're gonna find in the top five, you're gonna find four of the big five leagues where you would expect them to find them. You also have Brazil, where the teams have a lot of money, but it's also like
Mm.
their season usually goes from like February to end of year, so it goes with the natural year. So right now the teams, this is kind of their summer window, so they're spending a bit more. But then number 16 is the Spanish league,
Below the championship.
which, yes, so it's lower than a bunch of leagues. And if you ask, say, the sporting director of a Spanish club right now, what they will tell you is very simple. Due to league financial regulation, we can only buy whenever we sell. But that also puts them in a position where I feel they cannot sell even at a good, like they need it so much, like they can't even sell at a good price. The operation that just did, selling Dorgu to Manchester United for 30 million, I don't think there's a Spanish team, like a lower half Spanish team, cannot demand that price. They're too desperate.
Wow. Okay. So what we've seen over the last few years, obviously, is the financial regulations in Spanish football getting stricter and stricter, right? So salary caps, and then the kind of 1-to-1, or like the 40% rule, like all this kind of stuff, all these limits on spending. What is the current situation? Like, are you able to explain in simple terms what exactly is stopping Spanish club spending? Because, okay, a lot of the teams in the league don't have much money, but Real Madrid, for example, do have some money. and they had some needs as well. We've just seen Ancelotti come out and say, I've got 3 centre backs, and one of them is a midfielder, it's Chouameni, and the other 2 are Ramon and Asensio. They're kids. So this is one of the biggest clubs in the world, the biggest club in the world, who would never throw away a season, would never say the season's over, we're not going to win a trophy this season, like Arsenal might, saying, yeah, we can't do anything this window, or we're not going to do anything this window.
Yeah, so the Real Madrid situation, I would still say that it's kind of unique weirdness to Real Madrid rather than the larger trend of the league. Because at least from what we see from the club accounts, they seem to be doing great. And these guys always go around and always go around saying, "Hey, we just made a record a record revenue from the new stadium renovation and let's say the club has been really upfront about saying we're making more money than ever, yet it's not being used in transfers, and that leads me to a lot of questions. So is it that maybe, say, stadium debt, or there are other debt obligations or spending that make the club take a bit of pause? Even though Mbappe came in, the wage bill got lighter from other players leaving. Although, to be fair, usually when you win, winning titles is expensive. I remember I once saw so Real Madrid were from all their wins in the 2021-22 season, their wage bill went up throughout that year in 2022. It went up by 100 million. That's a lot. And that's just price money that they gave the players and everything. That's a big chunk of spending that they had to do. So could that be a factor? I don't know, but it already seems, let's just say that the club has been doing this for a while, of just being like, this is our target, and if we don't get a target, we're willing to leave that hole in the squad open for years. And the problem is that then, if you have that mindset, you should be willing to spend the money. They did it for Jude Bellingham, they did it for Tchouaméni, they did it for Endrick even, that they were willing to spend that big money. But when it comes to defenders, the last time this club spent a transfer fee on a center back was Eder Militao in 2019. So the one thing I would mention is that Real Madrid seem really averse to paying transfer fees for defenders. Not to pay them salaries. They did pay Rudiger and Alaba a pretty nice wage, but they really don't want to spend fees on defenders.
So do you think it's that they've got, their ideal targets in the summer and they're waiting to go for them? Because, centre-back wise, obviously there have been rumours about Jonathan Tah. I guess there have been rumours about Van Dijk, but not really. And it kind of looks like he might extend. Well, are we expecting, therefore, Real Madrid to go on some historic spending splurge when the summer comes?
Not for defenders, for sure. For defenders, the other thing is that I think, and this is an interesting one, where I feel like management has one idea of they seem to trust what's in the academy. And then it's almost like they're not. And again, this is my speculation. This is my speculation as someone who follows Real Madrid a lot. I almost feel like the management is telling Ancelotti, we have all of these kids from the academy who we think are pretty good. We're not going to make these more signings. Just use them. And Ancelotti does not seem to trust the kids as much. I feel like there's a difference in expectations between the management and Ancelotti. And that's part of why the club is in this problem, because I think the club expects Ancelotti to use the youth, and Ancelotti does not quite want to give them as many minutes.
So the next coach, you think, will arrive with part of this as their portfolio? We really expect you to develop the youth, whether as a cost-saving measure or because, Barcelona are kind of flying right now with their youth, and we have a great academy too. We're going to make the most of it as well. Is that what you think is going to be a key feature with the next manager?
I never know what this club has in terms of vision, if I'm honest. And especially the weird, Real Madrid already runs in a very unconventional way compared to most top clubs. The way they play, the way they do squad building is very different to all other top clubs. But the part that I find the most puzzling is how they select coaches. Still have no idea how they do that or what they expect of the next coach. In the end, whether Ancelotti, his contract ends in 2026, whether he stays or not this season will basically depend on whether he wins something or not. And that's so we're still in that planning uncertainty too.
Boy, oh
We
boy.
don't
Yeah,
we
you're
don't know
right.
what Real Madrid will do there. Yeah.
No, they are an idiosyncratic club in that regard. And when you look at some of the people who've been made Real Madrid manager over the last 10 years, there were quite a lot of people, I would say, elevated above their level. Thinking Benitez, Lopetegui, these kind of guys. Okay. Well, let's leave Real Madrid behind there. Victims of their own success. Poor Real Madrid, the tiniest violin. And shall we go to Serie A? Because Serie A was actually very busy. You know, Serie A and Liga, actually, between them, spent getting on for as much as the Premier League spent. Those two combined. But really, in Italy, it felt like the transfers were congregated around one or two clubs. So we saw Milan and Como doing a lot of work. So should we talk about Milan first? Because obviously, hired a new manager, comes in just in time for the window. It feels like they've really tried to remake the squad. Whether they've remade it for him, I guess, is an open question. But they've certainly tried to remake the squad with him.
For sure, Conceicao is known to be a pretty demanding guy, and I'm pretty sure he's done he's done a fair bit of yelling around to get a bit more what he wants. And I do think the profile of the signings already gives us an idea, a bit of what the plan is. When you see guys like Santiago Gimenez, or when you see Sotil and Bondo, who are more ball carrying kind of players, the feeling I get is that this is a team that's gearing up for more of a transition approach. They want to play faster. They want to do faster attacks, counters. That's the kind of play, which is consistent with how Conceicao teams play. So it feels like that's what they're doing there. What I find quite weird is going for Joao Felix, because it seems a player counter to that style.
Yeah, I cannot make sense of that one because, look, Conceicao I don't think is going to be wedded to, a particular formation or anything like that. But I do also think Joao Felix is one of those guys who's very hard to fit into a lot of setups. You can play him in the hole behind a striker, but he's not creative. You can play him out wide if you want, but he's not a one-on-one threat. You can play him up front, but he doesn't have much physical presence. He can do it. He has a bunch of talents, but he's just a hard guy to fit in. And when you look at this team, I was just like, well, I assume the front line is going to be Leao, Gimenez, and Pulisic. Like that feels like what it's going to be. So Felix and of course as well, Kyle Walker are quite confounding transfers for them to have made. Like, what do you think about Walker? Because in Conceição's Porto teams, what we saw was wingers tucking in, leaving loads of space for fullbacks to fly up. Perfect on the left hand side because you've got Teo Hernandez, and also because get Leao a little bit closer to the action. All good stuff. On the right, are they going to use Carl Walker as a conventional right back? That doesn't seem like a winning strategy to me.
Yeah, I would also be surprised if he were used in a more conventional way. One would almost expect a setup where maybe he stays back a bit more so that Teo Hernandez can go a bit more forward. You definitely don't want to put Kyle Walker in a scenario where he has to run up and down a lot at this point in time. Hopefully Serie A will be a bit slower league where he will suffer a bit less. So I don't know. I do think that for Conceicao, this will boil down to how do you kind of minimize how much movement he has to do up and down the pitch. I could like a setup where he's almost like an auxiliary center back, and then Theo goes and does whatever he wants up front. Sounds like the strategy that makes most sense to me, but we'll see what they do.
Yeah, I'm kind of hoping it's that because I'm also hoping that Conceição. I have quite a high opinion of Conceição, and I think that it would be smart for him to recognize that he is not, no disrespect, playing in the Portuguese league anymore. Serie A has a real wealth of excellent coaches who play a very diverse array of styles, and to say, well, we're going to play slightly more conservatively, with the kind of hybrid centre back, full back on one side, seems like a smart move, at least while he's getting his sea legs. Just to touch on Gimenez a little bit more, that was one of the bigger transfers outside of the Premier League this window. 23 years old, 6 feet tall, and quick enough. So you look at him and think maybe we're not going to get some of the weaknesses that you sometimes get with players coming out of the Eredivisie who are a little bit lightweight. But what do you think about him for Milan? Is this a reasonable step for him to make?
I think it makes sense. I was a bit more scared of him moving to the Premier League, if I'm honest. So I
Okay.
remember the first time I was looking at footage from Gimenez, I was thinking, like my first prejudice coming into it is like, okay, this is a guy who's probably just bullying guys physically in the Eredivisie, and that's why he's scoring a lot. And then you start looking at him, and it's like, oh wow, this is actually a very complete player. Like he's a guy who can do a bit of everything. He's smart. He makes smart runs. He's decent at kind of hold up play, combining and passing with other players. I like him a lot. My only concern was a bit on the physical side if he went to the Premier League. It's like, sure,
Sure.
it's good in a way to have a player who doesn't rely too much on his physicality. Like it's good to have a player who can do other things, but you still need a baseline level of physicality to win duels in the Premier League. And I was a bit wondering, will he be able to scale? Because it's like he's
Yeah.
fast and strong, but will he be fast and strong enough for the Prem? So I'm a bit less scared of that going into Serie A. I know this feels like a very stereotypical, oh, can he handle Premier League physicality? But I was a bit concerned about that, and I do feel that City Eyes may be a more reasonable step in that regard to see how he does. But I I have to admit I like the transfer. I also think with Feyenoord he's actually been in a situation, especially this year, where Feyenoord have had certain times where they really have to be more expansive in possession and try to dominate weaker teams, but they've also done, as we've seen in Champions League, a lot of just pure counter-attacking football. And
Hmm.
I feel
Hmm.
like this is going to be kind of similar to the model that Conceicao is going to take, that against big teams, he's going to be a bit more conservative, go more on the counter, like Feyenoord has done. And then against weaker teams, he's going to try something more expansive. So so I feel like he's going to go into a place with kind of a similar style where he's already doing well.
And I think that might serve them quite well in the Champions League. In the Champions League, they've obviously got through, and
They're
and
facing
that's
Feyenoord.
exactly. So it's going to be kind of a fun one there to see what kind of comes up. But he's Conceição's got a good record in the Champions League, and I also think Milan, not a terrible club to take over, because I think they were a little bit better under Fonseca than the results looked. Like the underlying numbers seemed a bit more positive on them, which is kind of the ideal managerial position to come into. And actually, I guess that kind of lets us talk about Como and also about Rennes in Liga, who were two of the most active clubs in this window. Now, both of them are on the edge of the relegation zone. I mean, Como a little bit higher up than Rennes. But both of these teams, if you look at their underlying numbers, are better than their position. Como are kind of ninth, 10th best in Serie A. Rennes are ninth, 10th best in Liga. But Como went out and bought 10 players this winter. Rennes went out and got, it might be 11. No, it's 10 as well. This is a strange one. This is kind of weirdly aggressive for the middle of the season.
Yes, I'm not too familiar with Ren's finances to know where do they get the money for all this, but yeah, both of these can be lumped into the same category of club who's a couple points away from relegation zone and would really, really like to avoid this. My main commentary comes with Como in that I felt like over the summer, I didn't like the age profile of a few of the guys they were signing.
Sure.
A bit on the older side. Um, Already, like going for example for Rafa Varane, for Belotti, for Cutrone. Like uh, those were older players. This time around in the winter, they went for pretty good, interesting young players. So that's progress. Maybe sign a bit less next time.
Yeah, like Cacre. I think that's a really interesting signing. Ikone, less excited about. Dele Alli, if you want to get him on a pace of play or something, I don't know what their deal is, but like that's fine
That's
with
one
me. I
of the
think
weird ones. That's one of the weirdest ones, but yeah, but it's a bit of a
yeah,
that's a bit of a Hail Mary the
sure.
triple, yeah.
And you're kind of like, if it works, like it'll be astonishing, but like it just probably won't work. Like that's okay. I don't really mind that kind of thing. Ren Ren are a weird one because they always have young talent being produced or being developed and going out the door. So over the last few years, it's been Doku and Due and Lefebvre and Guiri and Ugochukwu, like endless guys going out the door, like interesting young players. And so they probably did need to do some kind of restock, but some of these guys are like 19, 20, and then there are a few guys who are 30. So it feels like we need some guys to kind of get us out of this relegation situation now, and then also maybe restock on some young francophone talent for the next few years to come. I mean, I don't really know that much about some of these young players. Maybe it's just that they're owned by Salma Hayek's husband, and maybe he just wants to impress his wife, by like constantly signing players. But 20 mil for Seko Fofana at 29, coming back from Al Nassr. This 14 million on Brice Samba, I mean, he's a goalkeeper, but he's still 30. It just seems like a very strange scattergun approach to me.
Yeah, because at least with the younger ones, you can say, okay, some of them will make it, some of them don't. Maybe you can still make some money out of selling the ones that don't work. But with the older ones, uh, it feels a bit weirder. But as you said, it's kind of a mix of getting some older guys because we really need to win now, plus trying to set ourselves up for the future. And I can imagine that for a club like Rennes, like being so close to relegation when before you've been closer to European spots, like it's something that puts the club if in a bit of an emergency situation, and it looks like they've activated the emergency spending for that. So I guess my question both with Como and with Rennes is that both of them, yes, they are admittedly close to relegation zone, but if, as you said, if you look at the underlyings, would they maybe they would have been fine if they even without having to do 10 transfers in the winter window?
Yeah, or with, 2 or 3. Like this is the thing. Like Ravi made this point back in the autumn about how much of a first 11 you can actually swap around without seeing a drop off just in the kind of automatisms between the players. Relatively few of these players are going to be able to come in and make a positive difference this season because you simply cannot replace half your first 11 even if you're facing a relegation battle. Even if the players are better, that's not really a recipe for it all looking better immediately. So I don't know, like Como feels a bit like a vanity exercise to me. Like you said with Rafa Varane, those kind of transfers, they were like, we're going to have Varane partnering Hummels in central defense, and I was kind of like, oh, okay, like this is like that's kind of like the Villa idea of we know this guy's name and therefore we want him. I don't know.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, of course, when you make this many transfers as they've done in the last year, there will be some misses and there will be hits because I mean it would be disastrous if none of these guys were good. But like you see, for example, the Nico Pass pickup was a very smart one. Kakere also sounds like a good pickup. So I think I guess the question is like, what's the at least for me, what's the plan here? Are we gonna throw stuff at a wall and see what sticks, what doesn't? Um, yeah, as I said, I guess my feeling just from is just sure this is maybe these reinforcements are good, but wouldn't you be able to still do well with less?
Mm, agreed. Como remain a mystery. Okay, well, I think that just about brings us to the end of our wrap up of the European transfer window. We didn't have time for Germany. Sorry, Germany. Please forgive us. But Jose, before we say goodbye, where can people find you?
Yes, so at this point, I appear from time to time in a few podcasts. So I'm an occasional guest at the Managing Madrid podcast, usually being the guy. I'm the guy at Managing Madrid who talks about every other team who's not Real Madrid. Uh, so I'm
Okay.
so I normally preview, say, one of the like a team that Real Madrid is about to face, and then from time to
Cool.
time I will do a monthly column for Football España, which is more generally on either I pick a team from La Liga or just something on the overall state of Spanish football. So I am more of a Liga focused poster for sure.
Cool. And I think it's a really interesting time in the development of the league. It'd be really interesting to see if we actually see some of the other leagues in Europe as this kind of deflation takes hold in football, whether we see some other leagues moving towards Spanish football's way of doing things over the next few years to kind of to curb the risks of these huge wage turnover problems that we're seeing so many clubs set in store for themselves going forward. Um, Thank you very much for coming on today. It was a real pleasure to talk to you. And thank you to everybody at home for listening or watching. If you're watching on YouTube, please do like and subscribe to the channel. If you're listening on a podcast app, please leave us a 5-star review if you'd enjoyed the show and let us know what you'd like to hear us talk about next week. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time. Bye bye.